of years ago, when I was training for one of my first Ironman in 2022, I started to have this weird achy pain. And so I'd gone to my primary care doctor, and my general practitioner said, "I think you need to go see a chiropractor, Fritz. I've been spending so much time in aero position on my bicycle." And I actually started to get this bump in my lower back, upper part of my glute. And so I went to the Bucks County sports chiropractor over by, I think, High Point over there. And as I walked in, and it was inside this gym, the chiropractor called me in and said, "So Fritz, what hurts?" I was like, "This." And I could feel this bump, but the pain was a little bit not on the bump. And the doctor says, "I promise it's not serious. It's probably muscular, skeletal, and see a chiropractor." And I ended up having to see this chiropractor by 6 or 8 times. I forget exactly how long. And I thought he was just gonna snap my back or something. And thankfully, he did not do that. But over the course of several weeks of seeing him and doing the exercises, the pain started to get less and less and less, and the bump got smaller and smaller and eventually went away. And I asked him, I says, "What caused this?" And he said to me, and he was a person of faith, and he knew I was a pastor here at Trinity, and he had ridden his bike by our congregation, and he attended a church in Doylestown. He has since passed away from leukemia. And so he was a great doctor that we became fast friends as we shared athletic stories. And he says, "Fritz, you're not resting enough. You're doing too much. You can't bike every day." And that lesson has always kind of stayed with me. For his funeral, instead of going to the Presbyterian church, I said the best way that I could honor him was I got on my bicycle, and my indoor bicycle, and during his funeral, I live streamed that as I rode in honor of him, because we had always talked about going for a bike ride together. I thought of that story as I heard our gospel lesson, as I started to read it earlier this week. And the question that came back to me again and again is, where am I in pain? Where am I in need of healing? A couple of years ago, it was a physical pain for me that led me to go see my very first chiropractor. But I think that's a question that relates to all of us this morning. Where are we in pain, and where are we in need of healing? For some of us, it might be physical. We might have some sort of physical ailment that we need healing. For others of us, it might be emotional. There might be a relationship in our lives that is broken, where the relationship is frayed or stressed, and we need healing. It causes us pain. For the others of us, it might be a spiritual injury, where sometimes it's really hard to believe in a God because the problems of this world and our lives seem too big, and we find ourselves worried and anxious. For others of us, it could be emotional. It could be a mental health concern. In our gospel story today, we hear about this woman who for 18 years has been so bent over, she can't look up, she can't look around. She has been in chronic pain. She is most likely unemployed individual who's going to hire a woman who's bent over. She can't pick up firewood, she can't go collect water. The Greek word that gets translated for bent over actually means she was doubly bent. And while we don't know if there was some sort of psychosomatic illness that was also impacting her, we know that there is these spirits that are certainly on her, that Jesus casts out. So in some way, there's a physical and a spiritual healing or pain that she is experiencing. And she doesn't come to Jesus and say, "Jesus, heal me," in our gospel lesson. Rather, she's on the outskirts. She's on the border, and Jesus is the one who kind of calls her over and performs this really miraculous healing. even before she asks of it. And of course, this healing, because Jesus is an invited guest in the church that day, in the synagogue, the pastors, the clergy, the Jewish leaders observe this healing take place, and they're like, gotcha! You just broke the third commandment. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. How dare you do this healing on the Sabbath day? There are 6 days of the week, Jesus, that you're supposed to do. You can do healings, not on this day. And Jesus looks at these religious leaders and calls them hypocrites and tells them, who among you, if it was on the Sabbath and your donkey, if your animals were in need of water because it was hot weather, wouldn't untie them and go give them water? And we read for the only time in all of the Gospels, in all of the Bible, we hear a woman referred to as the daughter of Abraham. That even this woman who's been living in chronic pain, who has been exiled from her community because of her injuries, because of her illness, because she is bent over, is set free, and that she has a place in the community. This woman is a daughter of Abraham. And that Jesus sets her free and heals her, not just physically, but gives a spiritual healing as well, saves this woman. How does this apply to us today? I think there's a challenge here for us. If you heard what Mary said, the religious leaders immediately jumped down Jesus' throat. Jesus has challenged the traditions of the community. Healings are not to take place on the Sabbath. They accuse him of breaking the law, of upsetting the etiquette. And I think for us, and again, remember, Jesus also says in Mark chapter 2, when he talks about the Sabbath and he's talking about grains, when he's out teaching the disciples, that the Sabbath is made for us, not us for the Sabbath. In Mark chapter 2, verse 27. And so Jesus, as he challenges these religious leaders, calls them a hypocrite because they are allowing church tradition. They are allowing to interfere with this woman who has been held captive for almost 2 decades. And I think there's a word of caution for us as well. That while we may not struggle with people with this in our modern day context, thanks to modern medicine. And while, yes, there are some people who do live in chronic pain and who go decades without healing, we are told to be cautious. There's a word of caution in this story for us about how we perceive what is right and orderly in God's kingdom. That do we, when it comes to our traditions as a church, as a community of faith, allow our traditions to serve us, or do we try to serve our traditions? Well, we can't do that. We've never done that way before. Or no, we tried that once upon a time and it didn't work, so why would we ever want to try it again? Whatever that might be. And I love traditions. I am a Lutheran pastor because I love the traditions of our faith. Everything from the clothes that we wear on Sunday morning, to the liturgy that we say, to the songs that we sing, to the instruments that we hear. We are a traditionally based faith that dates back thousands and thousands of years. But we must, as a church, ask ourselves, because we risk being called hypocrites. In the same way that the religious leaders of our day, do we forget that God puts people first over their traditions, over these laws? So the word of caution and a word of good news. We also hear Jesus remind the people that the Sabbath day, while we are commanded to keep it holy, is here to help us. The Sabbath day, one day out of every 7 days, is here to remind us that we are set free. The Sabbath day is like a chiropractor in our lives. It helps us get unbent. The Sabbath day allows us to stop belly gazing, which is the way this woman was because she couldn't stand up straight. The Sabbath allows us to look up and to give us an economic and societal freedom to look at the world around us. The world that God has created, the people that God has placed in our lives, to remind us that it's not about our own belly buttons, but about looking at the community that God has placed us in. The community that God has called us to be a part of. The Sabbath isn't about trying to keep the law because of some Old Testament commandment, but because in the Sabbath, we are transformed. The Sabbath does the work in us by reminding us that we are not God's, but rather we are God's chosen people. And that however we keep the Sabbath, however we keep that day holy, is a day where we set aside time to spend in reflection and in prayer, where we spend a time giving God thanks for the blessings of our lives, for the ability, maybe like the woman in our story, to stand up straight, to be able to move again, to be able to sing praises, to gather together in church, to talk with family and friends and loved ones. A day to remember that we are made whole in God's image as beloved children of God. A little bit later on during communion, you're going to be invited to come forward after you've received communion, the body and blood of Christ, and we're going to have healing stations available. And on your way in this morning, I invited Deb to invite you to take one of the postcards. And this is one of the things you can, but you don't have to. It's an invitation to write down what pains you. Where in your life do you need healing? It might be physical, it might be spiritual, it might be emotional, it might be spiritual. But to write down where in your life you need God's healing, where in your life you are currently in pain. And you don't need to put your name on it or any identifying information. And then on Tuesday morning, Pastor Jonathan and I meet every week to review the pastoral care needs of our congregation that we've been called to serve. We do it on Tuesday mornings at 10 a.m. It's a standing appointment in both of our calendars. And we will pray over those index cards. And we will pray for the areas of pain in your life, the areas where you need God's healing in your life, knowing that in God, we are made whole. That in our because of the cross, Jesus promises to be with us. The reality is, those things, those areas of pain in our life are the crosses that we bear, the crosses that we carry every day. Spiritually, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Those are the pains that we carry in this life. And just like Jesus showed up in the synagogue that day, and that Jesus shows up here today, 2,000 years later, we look to the cross where those pains are made whole, where we receive the healing in God's love in the body and in the blood and in the presence of Jesus made flesh in our lives. Whereas our healers today, as they lay hands on those who come forward, pray for the healing touch of Jesus. Knowing that in this lifetime, healing may not come in the ways that we want it to. But God certainly promises to be with us until we are made whole on that last day. So on those index cards, I invite you to write your pain. And when you come forward, you can either leave it on the altar rail, or if it's private, you can fold it up and put it in the offering baskets. No one will know that it was from you unless you put your name on it. Knowing that Pastor Jonathan and I, as a part of our call to serve you as rostered leaders, will lift up those prayers for you on Tuesday morning as we gather together to look at the pastoral needs of our congregation as your colleagues in the gospel, as your co-workers in the fields of this life, knowing that all of us have pain, all of us are in need of healing, all of us in Jesus are unbent by the great chiropractor who makes us whole. Amen.